Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Sage HR Showcase webinar on the Timesheets module in Sage HR. My name's Alice, I'm one of your presenters, and I'm also joined today by my colleague Duncan. So we're both going to be presenting the session today and showcasing the different features of the Timesheets module. Now, Duncan will be back shortly, but for now, let's look at some housekeeping for those of you who've not joined us before, just so you know how everything works. So this control panel can be found towards the right-hand side of your screen. And that first icon there, the microphone with a cross through it, this is just showing you that your microphone is going to be automatically muted for the session. That isn't able to be changed, just to help with any issues of background noise and things like that. But if you do want to interact with us and you've got any questions to ask us, we'd love you to do so in the questions panel. So that is the speech bubble with a question mark in it. Me and Duncan have Matt and the two Ollies helping us today. They'll both be replying to your questions throughout the webinar. The three of them are Sage HR experts. So yeah, I'm sure they'll be providing some really great answers to the questions up until the end of the session. Now, just a heads up, we are expecting quite a busy session today, so the answers might take a couple of minutes to get back to you, but we will do our very best to get through as many as we can before we end the webinar. We also have handouts for today's session, so these will include all of the slides that we go through in the presentation. We've got a digital version, and we've also got a printer-friendly version too, so if you do want to print that out and kind of make notes as you go, you absolutely can. And then last but not least, just at the bottom, if you do want to switch to full screen and get a little bit closer to the demonstrations that we go through today, feel free to do so there, and then just click that again to shrink the screen back down. But that is your housekeeping. And as for what we're covering today, lots to get through, but I will begin with an introduction to the Timesheets module, a bit of an overview of what this is as well, followed by Duncan taking you through the timesheet settings, including timesheet groups and approvers too. I'll then be back to go through the process of processing timesheets. So this will include what the employees will do, as well as what the approver would do to edit or approve them. Me and Duncan will then talk about the clocking in and clocking out functionality of the timesheets module with a bit of a closer look at geofencing. And then at last section today, Duncan will be showing you some kind of recommended timesheet reports and kind of what comes next after the timesheets process. So that is what we're covering. Let's go ahead and get started with that introduction then of the timesheets module. So it is one of several additional modules that you can subscribe to in Sage HR. And a bit of a short overview of what this is. So it enables you to record hours that your employees worked over a defined period of time. And these records can then be used to calculate employee salaries or holiday allowances, or even things like tracking time spent on tasks and projects that you might have set up. So Timesheets does help to automate and speed up this process, ultimately cuts down on manual tasks, which you'll see as we go through the content in today's session. And another great thing, the employees are actually able to self-serve for a lot of things. So yeah, it saves time there too. Now, a lot of the Timesheets features can be used on the web portal, which we'll be showing mostly today, or on the mobile app as well, if that is something that your employees use. So it just depends on what you've enabled in your settings. So as I've said, Timesheets is one of the additional modules to Sage HR, so it is going to be an additional price. And to use it, you must have already subscribed to and set up the core HR module and the leave management module too. Then, of course, included timesheets in your subscription. Now, just bear in mind, this might differ depending on what products that you've already got with us and what package you've got too. So just in case, that does change things, but yeah, most likely will be an additional thing to kind of add on to your subscription. And just to let you know, these webinars that we're doing on Sage HR are actually in a series of webinars. We've already run sessions on core HR and leave management. So me and Duncan went through those. And if you missed them and you want to see what they're all about, we have included a link to the recordings on this slide. Another thing I want to mention as well, don't worry if you don't have the timesheets module or you're not really familiar with Sage HR. That's exactly why we're making these webinars. So hopefully it'll just give you a good insight into what the modules do, what it could do for your business, and then of course give you the opportunity to ask any questions in the Q&A as well. And then at the end, if you do think that this is something that you would like, you might think, yeah, this is something that the company could use, we will be able to point you in the right direction of getting some more information and prices. But before I pass over to Duncan for the kind of first main section of the webinar, just want to go through some of the key features of timesheets. So first one being, and I've already kind of touched on this, that the employees can self-serve, so they can fill in the timesheets themselves, and that helps to obviously track the hours spent on tasks and projects, but also just for them getting paid and things too. You can accurately track hours worked and calculate pay and overtime. Timesheets also has the clock in and clock out functionality, which can be online, mostly via the Sage HR app though, which will automatically and accurately update their timesheets. Timesheets do show leave approvals too, so that can help with like resource planning and scheduling. And you can manage, track and report on timesheets online too. Loads of handy reports for this, including overtime. That is one that Duncan will be showing a little bit later towards the end of the webinar. And you can adjust the timesheet approval process to suit your business. Sage HR is really customizable. So if you want something but don't want something else, you absolutely can do that. And we'll be showing you a bit more of those settings very shortly. But yes, speaking of those settings, it is now time to pass to Duncan for that first section of the webinar, which is going to be all about those timesheet settings. So it's over to you, Duncan.
Thank you so much, Alice. So I'm going to kick things off with the timesheet settings. As with most of the settings in Sage HR, in order to edit these options, you will need to be signed in as either an HR admin or be designated as a timesheet admin, which I'll show you where you do that in the demo. Now, the settings we're going to take a look at this morning are split into kind of three areas. So we're going to start with some general settings, which determine what timesheets look like and how they work for your employees. So that will involve timesheet administrators, setting the timesheet period, and some pre-fill options. We're going to explore the overtime settings, allowing you to track hours over and above an employee's working pattern and what you can do with that overtime. It can be a bit flexible, can be assigned to time off policies, for example. And I'm also going to show you at this point where to enable time clocking, but we are going to come back to time clocking later on in the webinar to give you a bit more detail on how that works. So what I'd like to do is to give you a look at some of these main settings. So I will just switch the camera off and we will switch to our demo. Now, as mentioned, you do need to have administrator access to get into the settings. So I am currently signed in as an HR admin. And as such, I can go to my username at the top of the screen just here, and I have access to the settings area. Now, once you go into settings, we're going to focus on the timesheet settings here on the left-hand side. So just expanding that, you can see these areas I just mentioned, general, overtime, and time clocking. And let's start with a quick look at some of these general settings. Now, first thing you can do is you can designate your Sage HR users to be timesheet administrators. So it doesn't give them full admin access to all of Sage HR, but it would give them access to the timesheet settings. So if you wanted to do that for any staff that aren't already HR admins, you can designate them in this drop-down box just here. Now we have got permissions that allows employees to export their timesheet information as reports. So of course that can be enabled if you want them to be able to do that. And then we have a section which controls how timesheets integrates with your time off policies. So if you have an employee that has booked time off and you want that to automatically adjust the timesheet, either by removing the hours for the day if they're absent for the full day, or reducing the hours in their working pattern for the hours they've taken or as time off, you can select which of the time off policies you want to include just here. So I've included holidays, sick days, and parental leave. So if an employee is on these types of leave, their timesheet will be automatically adjusted for those days or hours. Also the setting for public holidays. So if your business doesn't operate on bank holidays, you can have the timesheet set to 0 hours by default on any date that is a public holiday on your calendar. And then we have quite a key setting here where you would define your timesheet period. So this is the period of time that employee would record their working hours for and submit to a timesheet approver. So you've got the options for weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly or monthly. I've gone with probably the most common setting, weekly. And with weekly, you would choose what day of the week your timesheet begins on. I've selected Monday just here. And what I would say is once you've selected a timesheet period, we would not recommend that you change that unless absolutely necessary, as that can have an impact on previously submitted and approved timesheets. So we're happy with weekly, and our week is going to begin on a Monday. Now, scrolling further down, we have options to pre-fill the timesheet. So you can choose not to do this. So employees would need to record the hours they've worked and their start, end times and break times for each day. But if they do work a regular pattern, you can pre-fill the timesheet based on their working pattern, which is what I've selected at this point. And you'll be able to allow them to kind of edit the hours they've worked as and when required. And if you also subscribe to the scheduling module, you can pre-fill your timesheets from the scheduled hours. So if you've got rotas that you've assigned to your employees using scheduling, that can form the basis of the pre-filled timesheet. So that might save some time for those employees that do kind of regular work. Next up, we have some timesheet viewing options, and I'm going to show you how this impacts the employee's view of the timesheet a little bit later on. But we can show things like contracted hours and the difference between what they've worked and what they're contracted for, and also the option to show overtime above the timesheet. And then you can control how the hours worked look on the timesheets to your employees. So whether you want to show that as decimals or in hours and minutes. So for example, if you've worked 1.5 hours, if it was in decimals, it would show 1.5 hours on the timesheet. If you're showing it in hours and minutes, it would show 1 hour and 30 minutes. So that's what I've selected for the timesheet itself. But when it comes to running any reports, that will still show in decimals regardless of this setting. And then coming to the end of these general settings, timesheet editing and submitting controls what sort of information an employee can edit on the timesheet. So you can have timesheets automatically submitted if an employee is on approved leave for the whole timesheet period, as they won't be there to submit it themselves. You can allow them to change the hours to be less than their working pattern, and you can allow them to edit their workday. So if you're going to be using timesheets where an employee records what time they start and end and when they take their breaks, you would need to have this option selected so they can make any changes as necessary. But maybe if you're using clocking in, which we're going to cover later on, you might choose to disable that access so that it always works off their clock in and clock out times. And don't worry, if you do allow them to change their workday, you do see warnings if they've overwritten a clocked in time. We're going to see that a little bit later on. Just come into the bottom of these settings. You can display an alert if there's a difference between what an employee has worked and their working pattern. So I've opted to only show this alert if the hours are more than their working pattern, but you could show it if it's different or if they exceed a set number of hours. So these are the kind of main general settings. I'd like to move on to overtime next, just to show you how this works. So recording overtime is when hours over and above the employee's working pattern are designated as overtime on any reports and when the timesheet is submitted. So if you do want to track overtime in this way, you have two options of how you do this. So you could either look at each day individually, and then hours worked above the working pattern for that day would be classed as overtime. Or you have the second option here, where it would look at all of the hours in the working pattern for the timesheet period, and it would only count overtime for hours over the period that exceed that working pattern. You can, of course, choose not to track overtime at all by selecting this third option. Now, if you are counting overtime for each day individually, you then have the option to allow employees to move that to a time off policy rather than have that as paid overtime. So you can only use one policy for this. So you would tend to set one up specifically for time off in lieu, or toil, as I've called it here. So I've got a time off policy that I'm going to use that employees can transfer their overtime to, and then take that time back. So that's been selected in this drop-down list just here. And then you've got the option to either automatically move overtime to toil, so only given the option to move it to toil, or what I've done is I've given the employee flexibility so they can choose how they want to split their overtime when they submit the timesheet. A little bit further down, overtime categories are available if you track it daily. So what this can do is it can classify overtime based on how many hours have been worked over and above the working pattern, so, and whether it's on a working day or a non-working day. So I've set up 3 categories just for this demo. I've got the first rate of overtime, which is set up as up to 4 hours extra on working days. I've got rate 2, which is for overtime between 4 and 10 hours extra on working days. And I have a weekend and holiday rate, which is any hours worked on non-working days or holidays. So this can be useful when it comes to the reports and working out maybe what you're going to pay employees for that overtime. And then once you've got these categories set up, you can choose which of the categories you want to use per timesheet group. And I'll come back to timesheet groups in just a moment's time. So we've had a look at general and overtime. A quick peek at time clocking. So as I say, we will come back to this later on. If you want to enable time clocking, you have a tick box from this area here, and once enabled, you'll then see some further options. So to start off, we're not going to use the time clock. We're going to look at sort of simple timesheets, but watch this space. We'll come back to this a little bit later on. So those are your 3 main categories of the settings. Now we've seen what some of those settings do, I just wanted to come back to how they affect the timesheet itself. So on the slide here, I've got a screenshot of a timesheet with most of the features switched on. But I'm going to show you where the settings kind of affect this timesheet. So first of all, the timesheet period defines how many days an employee can record their hours for each timesheet. So I've got mine set up as weekly. So you can see my timesheet period is just 1 week, starting on a Monday. We've then got the timesheet viewing options. So I did choose to show contracted hours as a column and the difference between contracted hours and worked hours. But you can, of course, switch that off by clearing those boxes. We've got our overtime shown as a total above the timesheet because we've got that box ticked. And you can see when it's recording total hours, it is doing that in hours and minutes as per my settings. Now for timesheet editing and submitting, the option at the bottom there, allowing employees to edit start and end times in the main timesheet view, will activate the start, finish and break columns. And it just means if you have given them edit access, they would be able to quickly change start and finish times from the main timesheet. But the key setting, allowing employees to edit the workday, is selected in this case. So they could either edit the start and finish times, or they can click in to the actual date that they're working with, and they can make changes to start and finish time or clocked in times if they are using clocking in. So it's up to you whether or not you allow them to do that. And finally, the clocking in information is there if you've got the time clock enabled. So the clock time will be based on the actual time an employee clocked in and out for starting work, breaks, and ending work. So hopefully that puts into context where some of those settings come in. Now, before we go back to processing timesheets, I just want to mention timesheet groups. So this allows you to group your employees together with a designated timesheet group manager. Now that manager would be responsible for approving the time off requests, and you can set up groups for kind of any reason that you would like to group your employees. So it could be employees in different locations, different teams or areas of the company, or even those with kind of differing working patterns. And it's the timesheet group that will determine whether or not an employee has access to timesheets. If they're not allocated to a timesheet group, they wouldn't be able to complete timesheets. The group manager is also assigned to the group. So they are then responsible for approving the hours, and they should be able to view and edit the hours as well for the employees within that group. But they must be assigned to the group by either an administrator or a timesheet administrator. So I want to give you a quick look at the timesheet group settings. So just jumping back to the demo here. Timesheet groups has its own option just at the bottom. Now for this demo, I just have the one group set up, but to add any additional ones, I would simply click onto Add New Group, and that's where I can enter a name for the timesheet group. And then we have 3 settings. So we can tick a box to send monthly reminders to submit the timesheets. We can tick this box at the bottom if we want to allow these employees to clock in from the mobile device, if you've enabled the time clock. And then there is a setting in the middle which allows employees to clock in through API. So if you have a different clock-in system that you want to integrate with Sage HR, that is possible via API, but you should only tick that box if that's what you want to do, because that will switch off the time clocking features in HR, and you would use kind of the third-party time clocking to feed that information in. So that's where we set them up. To assign employees and managers to a group, you would click onto the eligibility option once the group is created. And you can see you've got an employees and managers tab. So I've got 3 employees that have access to timesheets in this group, and I've designated a manager for that timesheet group as well. So as simple as ticking the employees that you want to add and the managers, and then you can click Save to save any changes. So yeah, that's a quick look through some of the key timesheet settings and how to set up your groups and managers. But it is now time to bring Alice back, who's going to take us through processing timesheets. Over to you, Alice.
Thank you, Duncan. Yeah, so processing timesheets, this includes entering, editing, submitting and approving them. Now in Sage HR, there are a couple of ways to enter the timesheets. This just depends on your settings, but also as your preferences as a company. So employees' timesheets will either be blank, or you've got the option to pre-fill them with the employee's working pattern, as Duncan showed earlier. Now, if it is pre-filled, this will save them having to enter everything, but they will still be able to edit or adjust the timesheets if there are any changes that are required. Something else your employees have the option of using is that timesheet clocking in and clocking out functionality to kind of record the timesheets that way. So as we've seen, that can be turned on in your settings, and we will show you that a little bit later. But this would mean that the employee would physically click or swipe to clock in and out, and then these times would automatically populate their timesheets for them. As you can see on this image as well, employees can select the relevant timesheet period from a drop-down, then enter the timesheet from there, just to make sure that in that correct period. And when it comes to entering them, I will show you how this is done in a demonstration. It is nice and straightforward to do. But once the employee has entered the timesheet, whether that's manually or via clocking in and clocking out, and they're happy with that, what they would then do is submit these hours for approval. So Duncan was just talking about those timesheet groups and timesheet group managers before. So the manager for the employee's timesheet group will be who these are submitted to ultimately approve or decline them. Something I find particularly helpful with this process too is that the timesheet itself does allow the employee to easily see the total hours that they've worked in the timesheet period. It also shows if they've worked overtime, and if they have worked overtime, how much they've worked. So Sage HR works this out based on the employee's working pattern or working hours, which will be specified in the employee data settings in status and working patterns. If the employee has worked overtime, and you've allowed this in your settings, Duncan did just cover this before, when they submit the timesheet, for any overtime that they've worked, they do have the choice to give these hours to a chosen time off policy, such as time off in lieu, or they could split the hours to get paid for some overtime too. So an example, let's say the employee worked 10 hours of overtime in the timesheet period. They could say they wanted to be paid 5 hours of overtime, but then 5 hours to go into that chosen time off policy. So this is a great option. It just means the employee can essentially implement that each period themselves, obviously providing it's set up. So instead of them asking you for it and asking you how many hours they want, then you checking the balances and checking things like that, then applying it yourself. They can do that themselves when they submit the timesheet, so it will speed up that process quite a bit. But that was a bit of an overview of entering and submitting timesheets. I would now like to go into the portal to show you how this works. So I'm actually logged in as one of my employees. This is Ava. So I'm logged in as her. Now I'm just on her dashboard at the moment, but if Ava wants to check her timesheets on the portal, enter them and get them submitted, she can do so just by going to the timesheet section and then just selecting the timesheet period from this drop down. So currently on week 7, let's actually go to week 5, and this is her timesheet for week 5. Now notice we don't have that clocking in and clocking out column anymore because that is not turned on in the settings. We do have the start, finish and break time though, along with the contracted hours and difference, which Duncan made sure was ticked in the settings. We can also see the submit button as well, so this hasn't been submitted just yet. But as we know, because of those settings as well, this timesheet is pre-filled with Ava's working pattern. This will save her time because she doesn't have to enter everything. We can see there are already kind of populated times here, starting at 9, finishing at 6 with a 1-hour break, Monday to Friday. So that is Ava's working pattern. But Ava has actually, worked some overtime this week. So if she did want to adjust this timesheet, a couple of ways that she could do this. So first thing that she could do is actually click into these times here and edit them. So Thursday she did work some overtime until 9 p.m. So she could actually put in that time of 9 p.m. and we can see that's now changed, and she's got the option to save or cancel these changes. So she'll go ahead and tick that. So if you've enabled the employee to edit these, that is one way that they can change it. And notice we now have that kind of warning there. Just warning that the total hours are more than the employee's working pattern now. Another way that she could edit the hours is by clicking the day itself. So these kind of links on the left here. So another day she worked overtime was Saturday. So I'll click on this and should be able to enter the times here. So she started at 8 o'clock and finished at 12. No break on this day, it was just 4 hours overtime there. And if she wanted to pop in a comment, she could, if there's any extra information that needed to be entered for this shift. But other than that, she can just click Save Changes. And we can see that change there. Now, since Sage HR knows what Ava's working pattern is, that 40 hours per week, it looks at those hours that we've just entered and it knows that this is overtime because it's above and beyond her working pattern. So I did mention we can see these warnings on the timesheet, just warning that they're, above the employee's working pattern. And if we look at the top here, we can see these extra hours showing as overtime. So that's reflected in these totals. So out of those 40 contracted hours, she's actually worked 47, meaning that 7 of those are overtime. And we have actually set up a different rate for these overtime hours, as Duncan showed in the settings. So the one for Thursday, that'll be just the kind of general overtime rate there. I think that was rate 1. But the Saturday one, because that's a non-working day, that is a separate weekend rate, which we've set up for her. But she's added that overtime, she's edited her timesheet, and she's happy with those adjustments. So next thing she would do is go ahead and submit this timesheet, and that would be submitted to her timesheet group manager, ultimately the person who's going to approve them. So this window's actually come up. This is the option that I mentioned where an employee can choose how to split the overtime hours. So remember, Duncan had enabled this in the settings earlier. So she's got the option to choose to get paid overtime or pay these hours into a time off policy. So in this case, the company's chosen a time off policy for time off in lieu, or she can split the hours between those two. So she's actually going to go ahead and split these. And for the 3 hours that she worked on the Thursday as overtime, she's going to put all 3 of these into that time off in lieu policy. And for the 4 hours on the Saturday which she worked, because it's at that higher rate, she actually wants to be paid those. So she's going to leave that as 0 and just keep that as paid overtime. And once she's happy that she's split that as she'd like, she can just go ahead and click submit. Little notification to say that that's been submitted, and that's now gone across to the approver. Now, one last thing to kind of point out here before we go back to the slides is this button called Withdraw Timesheet. So if the employee submits the timesheet and thinks, oh, well, I've actually made a mistake, or I forgot to add a comment, or forgot to edit something, before it's approved, the employee can withdraw this timesheet, make those necessary changes, and then submit that again. So that is an option there. But now that we've seen the timesheets be entered and submitted to the approver, whoever this is will then be able to approve or decline these requests. Now, depending on their settings, they'll also be able to edit the timesheets. So maybe the hours are incorrect, but the employee doesn't have access to edit them, or the employee's entered the wrong start or finish time. The approver will be able to decline the timesheet, and then the approver or the employee can make those necessary changes and then submit it again to be approved. An important thing to bear in mind, to edit timesheets, they do need to be declined first in order to make any changes. So although the employee is able to do their own timesheets and self-serve for the most part of the process, the approver does ultimately have that kind of casting vote over what's approved. The approver will also be able to quickly see an employee's timesheet status, just so you're aware of what this is. So just that little image on the slide there, they will have a dot against their name in the timesheet section, and that's going to indicate whether they've submitted the timesheets and whether that's been approved yet or not. So you'll kind of know whether there are still timesheets to approve or if there's anyone who still needs to submit. So green would be that the employee submitted the timesheet and it's approved. Yellow, that it's submitted but still needs to be approved. And then no dot just means no timesheet has been submitted. Now, if the employee does forget to submit the timesheet, that can happen quite often, the approver can still approve what's there. They can still approve the timesheet. But let's go back to the portal again. This time we're actually going to go in as Oliver, who is Ava's timesheet group manager. So Oliver's job is to, be able to go in and approve those timesheets. So yes, back in Sage HR, this time as Oliver, so I'm no longer the employee. We're currently on his dashboard. If I just refresh this and scroll down, I can see some tasks in this My Tasks section. So this is actually showing some of the employees' timesheets that have been submitted, but still need to be approved. So I say we need to approve these timesheets for Ava and another one of my employees. So this section is also where they'd be able to see any holiday requests or other tasks that they've been assigned, which you'll have seen if you've came to our previous webinar on leave management, things like that. But Oliver could go ahead and view the timesheet. So let's view Leo's first, another one of my employees. Oliver would be able to kind of check this over and notice that this message is here too, just warning us that you do need to decline the timesheet first in order to edit it. But be able to kind of check this over, and if it's correct, they'll be able to click approve, and then if not, of course, then there needs to be amendments made to click decline. So notice at the moment Leo has a yellow dot against his name, so he has submitted the timesheet, but it's not yet approved. But if we go ahead and click approve, we've got the choice to notify the employee. I'm just going to leave that blank for now. And once I click approve, we can see that's changed to green, so I know that that's been submitted and approved. One of my other employees, Ava, so she has that yellow dot, so we still need to approve hers. Remember that we just submitted that in the last demonstration. Oliver could just view hers by clicking on her name. That will bring us to the timesheet for the same timesheet period. And he'd be able to kind of check this over for approval too. Now, Oliver has actually noticed that there are some changes needed here. So remember, it will need to be declined first. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and click decline. I'm going to add a comment this time too. So I've just noticed that Ava started later on the Wednesday morning due to an appointment. So I'll just make that note there and she'll know what to change. edit to 10 a.m. So just really random example there, but you could add the comment in for what needs changing. I am going to notify the employee that this needs changing and that it's declined, and then I'll go ahead and click decline. And now that it has been declined, just to let you know, it doesn't have to be the approver who edits the timesheet. They could just decline it, and then the employee could kind of re-edit that and resubmit it. So whatever works for you and whatever works for your settings. But that timesheet now is at the point of being edited and then resubmitted. Notice on the left as well, we now don't have a dot next to Ava's name. That's because her timesheet for this period is no longer submitted. It's been declined. But in a nutshell, that's kind of what the approval process looks like to either approve or decline the timesheet on the online portal for Sage HR. So remember, we were logged in as Oliver there, who is the timesheet group manager, and the approver for Ava and Leo, who are the employees. Now, an important thing to note at this point as well is that whilst the employees can use the mobile app or the online portal to enter, edit and submit timesheets and check things like that, the approver, so Oliver in my case, they're not actually able to approve the timesheets on the mobile app. That is only possible to do on the portal, as we saw there. Another thing as well, if you have enabled geofencing, which is something we'll look into in a bit more detail shortly, the employees will also only be able to clock in and out using the mobile app. And yeah, again, that's something we will go over in a few minutes' time. But that was a closer look at processing timesheets. That does bring us on to showing you something we mentioned a little bit earlier, which is a different way of entering the timesheets using the clocking in and clocking out functionality. So before I show you how to use that, it is over to Duncan again to show you how to set this up.
Thanks again, Alice. So I'm going to take us through the settings briefly for clocking in and clocking out and touch on geofencing and work zones. And then Alice will kind of put that into action and you'll see how clocking in and out works in the demo. So clocking in and out is essentially recording the exact time when employees start work, stop for a break, or end work. And these clocking times, when they've been clocked in, then appear automatically on the employee's timesheet, and they will then determine the number of hours worked each day. Now, employees do have options to clock in either online via the dashboard. There's a clock in widget in the online portal, or they can use the Sage HR mobile app, which tends to be the most common option. Now, once enabled, clocking in is available for all employees assigned to a timesheet group. So they'll see the clocking in functionality, but if you still have that setting to allow them to edit their workday, they could still go in and record their start and end times without clocking in. So it's up to you really what you're going to do with those settings. Now, in addition to clocking in, you can set up geofenced work zones. So the way that this works is that you will define an area on a map, which is a physical location with kind of an invisible border. You can set a radius for this work zone just to allow for any variances in signal strength and stuff like that. And if you assign an employee to a geofenced work zone, it does give you the ability then to check their location at the point when they log in or when they clock in to see whether it is inside or outside of that work zone. So there are two settings. You can let them clock in from anywhere, but then be alerted on the reports if they've done this outside of a work zone, or you can restrict their clocking in and out so that they have to be physically located within a work zone to actually record a clock in or clock out. So the location comes from the employee's mobile device on the Sage HR app, so they will need to give permission to location services. And if you do use geofencing, you've assigned an employee to a work zone, they wouldn't be able to use the web portal to clock in. They would have to do that from the app. Now, I do want to show you these settings. I'm going to show you how to set up a work zone as well. So let's just bring HR back up on screen. So I'm still within my settings area. I'm signed in as an administrator. And we're going to go to the time clocking section now. And at this point, I'm going to enable the time clock. So once I've got this box ticked and I click on to save, that's going to switch time clocking on, and then you can see I've got a number of other options just underneath. Now the first one, time clock rounding, will round the time that an employee starts, ends, or goes on breaks on the timesheet itself to the nearest minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 15 minutes. So you can choose whether you want the exact time to determine the kind of start time on the timesheet, or whether you want it rounded to one of these increments. You can set up a grace period, which will prevent notifications being sent if employees clock in within a certain number of time of their designated start time. So we've got that set to 15 minutes. And you have the auto clock out option. So if an employee forgets to clock out, you can set a limit to the number of hours they can be clocked in before they are then automatically clocked out by the system. Now, just under this, we've got some alerts. So if you've still got the setting enabled to allow employees to edit their workday, it does mean that even if they are clocking in, they'd be able to go into their timesheet on the web, and they would be able to amend clock-in times, maybe if there's been a mistake or they forgot to clock out. And if you want to see a warning when that has happened, you can switch the warnings on the timesheets on. But of course, you could remove that option altogether, and then it would be down to the kind of timesheet manager or admin to make any necessary corrections. So those are your main time clocking options, but I want to briefly show you work zones for geofencing. So I'm going to create a work zone just to show you how this works. You give it a name. So I'm going to call mine Sage Newcastle. You can find the location on a map. I find that adding a postcode usually helps with that. And then you can kind of click on your map where you want your work zone to be centered. So I'm just picking our head office here, and then you can choose a radius size. So at the moment, this is where I've got my work zone set up. So if employees are physically located within this work zone, that would then allow them to clock in without any warning to say that they're outside of that work zone. Now you would set the rule as to how you want this to work. So if you want them to be able to clock in wherever they are, but you want to see if they were outside of a work zone when they clocked in or out, you would choose this first option. And then on the reports that managers can run, on the time clocking reports, it would show you if they were outside of that work zone. Or you can restrict it so that you only allow them to clock in when they're physically located within the work zone. And the same goes for clocking out as well. Now, the location and the work zone rules can't be changed once the work zone is set up, but you can, of course, delete and set up new ones if you need to. So I'm just going to click next. You can then choose which employees you want to be in that work zone. And if you create the work zone from there, you can see that is now created. And it means for those employees that are in the work zone, they will need to use the mobile app to clock in. And it will, at the point they're clocking in or out, it'll check their location and it will record whether it was inside or outside of the work zone. So it's not live tracking. It doesn't tell you exactly where they were. It's just whether they were in or out. So those are your main settings for timesheets. And of course, we have added links on the handout if you want to read more about time clocking and geofencing. But I'm going to pass over to Alice again now, who's going to show you how clocking in and out works from the point of view of an employee. So back to you, Alice.
Thanks again, Duncan. Yeah, so once this is set up, and of course, depending on your settings, employees will be able to clock in and out either on the portal or on the app. To clock in from the portal, from the dashboard, the employee will have a button to click, as you can see highlighted on this image here. So this will either display clock in or clock out, of course, depending what the employee would do next. If they did clock in, this would then start counting up how long they'd been in work for. And then once they clock out, this will apply to the employee's timesheets. The employee could also use the mobile app to clock in or out by swiping. So swiping in or swiping out using the slider that you can see on this image, and that is found on the home page of the app. Now, something to bear in mind, we have mentioned as well, if you have enabled geofencing, employees will only be able to clock in and out from the mobile app, not the portal. And yeah, that's just because geofencing does need that kind of location stamp at the point of clocking in to check, whether they're in that work zone or not for the feature to work. So Duncan did already show you that we've enabled clocking in. So let's go to another demonstration. I would like to show you one of my employees who actually uses this functionality. Perfect. So another one of my employees, this is Leo, and we did see his timesheet before. I'm logged in as them. We're just on his dashboard at the moment, and I can see he's actually already clocked in for the day. So that is kind of ticking up with the time that he's been at work. I won't click this now. I don't want to disrupt his day, but to clock out, he literally just needs to click clock out, and that'll stop that timer. So that is how to do it on the portal. So if he was going on a break or on his lunch, he'd be able to clock out and then clock back in when he's back. That would record, how long they've been at work and also how long they've been on a break for too. But if I go to the timesheets section on the left, I'm actually going to go to week 6. So just select that period from the drop down. We can actually see that Leo has been clocking in and clocking out for this week. So we can see that column there now that we've enabled that in the settings with those times there too. Now, depending on how lenient you are with your employees, you could actually give them the ability to edit these times. So actually notice this message here. This actually says that the employees manually edited the clocking in or clocking out time. So if they did edit it, you would know. There is going to be a message to kind of indicate that. And they would edit that similar to how we did with Ava's timesheet a bit earlier. Now, some people might find this kind of defeats the object of clocking in and clocking out if you are changing those times. Totally up to you whether you let them edit it or not. That is the beauty of Sage HR, so you can totally customize that. You can enable it if you wish, or of course stop them from editing it if that's what you want. So if you don't let your employees edit these timesheets, the employee won't be able to click in these start and finish and break times. So notice I'm not able to click in these now. But if they did notice that there was like a mistake on a particular day and there was something that needed editing, what they could actually do is click on the day, let's say Thursday, and they'll be able to add a comment. So instead of editing it themselves, the timesheet group manager would be able to edit it for them. So let's just pop in a note to say, I started later this day, edit to 9:30 a.m. And then, of course, whoever has the ability to edit will be able to kind of fix that timesheet from there. So once they save those changes, and once they submit that timesheet, as I showed you a bit earlier, the approver would be able to kind of get that message. Remember, they will need to decline the timesheet first in order to make those changes. But yeah, that's about all there is to it really for clocking in and clocking out. Remember, they can do that on the portal, or if they've enabled geofencing, that will be on the app by swiping in or swiping out. But before we do move on to the next section, I would like to show you a bit of a closer look at geofencing, kind of what this is and what this means for your company. So I do have a short video to play for you, which I made just to kind of show you a bit of this. And then, yeah, we'll be back to kind of continue the content after that. So bear with me just a moment.
We're helping businesses perfect their people processes with smart tools from Sage HR. Say hello to more accurate time tracking with geofencing, available now in Sage HR. Now GPS enabled, our mobile clock-in lets employees clock in and out from the app when they're on site. Gain insights into when and where your employees clock in and out, minimizing discrepancies and ensuring accurate payroll processing thanks to customizable work zones chosen by you to suit your business's needs. With geofencing, you can ensure your employees are adhering to scheduled work hours and break times within designated boundaries, which auto-populates accurate timesheets that you can rely on, helping you understand working patterns and locations to make informed scheduling decisions. with the safety and assurance that people are in the right place at the right time. Turn precision time tracking into seamless rota planning with our integrated timesheet and leave management modules, now including geofencing, so you can maximize efficiency and focus on helping your business thrive. Get started with Sage HR today.
Perfect, that is me back. So that was a bit of a closer look at the geofencing feature in Sage HR. Lots of useful links and things linked on the slides throughout the handout as well, so remember to download that. But with that being said, it is now time to pass over to Duncan for our last section of the webinar. So what comes next?
Thanks again, Alice. So we're going to spend the last 5 minutes just having a quick look at what else you can do once you start using the timesheet module. And I wanted to start with a quick look at some of the useful reports that you can run, either as a timesheet group manager or as an HR admin. So I've got a list of recommended reports here. I'll try and show you one or two of these in the demo. You can look at timesheet status, employee timesheets. There's an hourly calculator to total the hours over a period, or there's reports specifically focused on overtime. And you will find with many of the reports, you have the option to export a version or versions of that report to do further analysis in Excel. So quick look at some of these reports and where to find them in the program. So I'm logged in as an admin, so I do have access to all of the reports. If I select this reports option towards the bottom left corner, I then have the timesheets reports shown just here. So I can run any of these reports within this list. So a quick look at a timesheet status. So if there's a period of time where you want to check at a glance whether the timesheets have been submitted and approved, you can generate the report like so. And it is color coded. We can see that Ava is at this point needing to submit her timesheet for week 5. So that's quite a good one at a glance to see if anyone needs to perhaps be chased up. Employee timesheets allows you to report on a specific timesheet period. So we've been working in week 5, I think, in this demo. If I generate the report for week 5, you can see you've got the view split by day. You've got things like the contracted hours and differences, and any overtime and whether that's been assigned to the toil policy. So obviously this one needs to be approved before the figures were to show here. And again, you do have these export option if you want to export the report and look at it in Excel. So all of these reports can be found, as I say, from this section on the left-hand side. So have a look at what would suit your needs the best. Now, as well as these reports, if you came along to our leave management webinar, you might be aware that you can now set up irregular hours time off policies. So these policies accrue holiday leave for employees who are irregular or part-year workers based on a percentage of their hours worked. Now, with the timesheets module, you can use the approved timesheets to automatically record the time worked, which will then start to accrue the holiday for these particular policies. So you can see in the settings, you can either get an administrator to add the hours manually, or you can base it on the approved timesheets. And if you have based it on the timesheets, you can see each time a timesheet is approved, it calculates the number of hours holiday that would accrue, and that then gets added to the holiday balance for the relevant employees. So quite a new feature to go with the new legislation that came in April last year, and I have put a link on the slide if you want to read more. And last of all, finally, I just want to mention the new payroll timesheet integration feature, which is available for our Sage Payroll Cloud product, the one you access via a browser, also known as Sage Business Cloud Payroll. So if you have the timesheets module included in your payroll package, it is now possible to configure payroll by mapping various payments to hours and overtime, and you can then get the timesheets to feed the hours directly into the pay run process. So that is probably the most recent feature, I guess, in Sage Payroll. It's not available, unfortunately, for Sage 50 Payroll at this stage. But if you use Sage Payroll in the cloud, you can read more about timesheet integration following the link on the slide. So that kind of brings us to the end of what we're covering, but I'm just going to bring Alice back, who's going to run us through some of our further support that's available to help you guys out. So back to you, Alice.
Yeah, thanks again, Duncan. So yeah, that does bring us to a close for the content for the timesheets module. I just want to say thank you very much for joining us this morning. There are still quite a few questions coming in, so we will continue working through them until the end of the session. And whilst our team does that, I'm just going to go through some further support with you and let you know of some kind of further resources that we've got available. I will also be launching a poll on your screen very shortly for those of you who would like a bit more information on the timesheets module or just Sage HR in general after the session. But first up for further support is webinars. So me and Duncan do have upcoming sessions on Sage 50 payroll mostly. So we've got Get Your Payroll Done, Process Payroll, which is this afternoon. We've also got ones on minimum wage check, an introduction to payrolling benefits, and another Get Your Payroll Done, but this time focusing on the month-end tasks. And we've also got our next HR advice webinar booked in, so that is 6th of March, and that is going to be real scenarios and real advice. We do have some special guests from Advisor Plus for this too. They are experts on HR, so they will have some really great examples and advice for that session. So get yourself signed up for those at sage.co.uk/webinars. We've also got the Sage University as well, so sageu.com. You can set up a free account on here, and we've got loads and loads of kind of helpful training courses and training on the modules of Sage HR. So if you do want to kind of learn a bit more or kind of work yourself through any of those on there, set up your account and yeah, go to Sage University. But that does pretty much bring us to a close. Me and Duncan are going to go on mute just for a few minutes to kind of check on that questions panel and yeah, continuing answering those. While we do, I am going to put up this poll on your screen. So if you would like more information on Sage HR and you're happy to be contacted, just click yes and submit your answer there. If you don't, obviously click no and submit that too. But yeah, we'll leave that up as we go on mute. And yeah, be kind of back to wrap things up in a few minutes. Hello everyone, that is just us back again. I think we've got through most of those questions now. Still a couple to go, so we will leave the webinar open as we kind of answer those. But yeah, it is now time to end the webinar. So thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed it. One last ask from us is that you will see a short survey as you exit the webinar. So if you just have a moment to fill that out, me and Duncan would really, really appreciate that. We do read every single comment that you leave us. We look at every score as well, just to try to make these webinars as good as possible. But on behalf of me and Duncan, Ollie and Matt, enjoy the rest of your week. We'll see you on another webinar very soon. It's goodbye for now.